What settings should you use to get the best looking, smoothest and most cinematic videos with the DJI Mini 3 Pro, and also the best looking photos? Well, several months ago I released a video going over the settings I was using to do just that, but since then a few things have changed. We've had several updates to the DJI Fly App, which have brought in new things such as the gain and expo settings menu, aperture and ISO priority, and also style parameters which allow you to adjust sharpness and noise reduction. And in this video, I am going to go through all the DJI Fly App settings menus and explain what options I have turned on and which ones I'm not using and why to get the best results with this drone. So grab your controller and let's jump right in. So let's start with the interface and let's start with videos. Firstly, we want to take a look at resolution and FPS. So you do that by tapping the res and FPS icon on the bottom right of the screen. I use 4K, which is the highest resolution available on the Mini 3 Pro, and we want the highest quality videos, so we want to choose the highest resolution. I also use 30 FPS, and I do this for two reasons. Firstly, to be able to avail of the dual native ISO in the Mini 3 Pro, which gives you higher quality videos, you need to use an FPS of 30 or lower. And you can see that with the HQ symbol next to 30 FPS. The second reason is I find social media apps such as Instagram prefer 30 FPS. It gives a smoother playback to your videos. And so because I post quite a lot of my videos to Instagram, I use 30 FPS. The next thing you want to set when it comes to recording videos is the color profile. To do that, go to camera, and in the second option down you will see color. For this, I use the normal color profile. I find the normal color profile provides fantastic looking videos. The colors look saturated and beautiful straight from the drone, and it cuts down time for me because it means I don't need to color grade in post. I can take the clips straight from the drone and post them straight online. Now, when recording videos, we have two main modes. We have auto and manual mode. And I've actually found myself starting to use the auto mode where the drone adjusts the shutter speed and ISO to get the correct exposure for you automatically a lot more. The reason for this is we're coming into winter, so I have much less time when recording clips. You might have a day where it's very cloudy and all of a sudden the sun makes a brief appearance and you need to try and get the clips as quickly as possible. And so I just find the auto mode is much faster and actually does a really great job of getting the exposure right most of the time. The only thing I do when using auto mode is adjust the exposure compensation. Exposure compensation allows you to tell the drone to expose slightly darker or slightly lighter when using auto mode, and you can adjust this by using the EV icon on the bottom right of the screen if you tap it, and if you drag the slider down it will darken down the image, and if you drag the slider up to a positive number it will brighten the image. My preference is minus 0.3, and I do this because I like to ever so slightly underexpose my image, so I know that there's no chance or very little chance that my highlights will be overexposed. Because you can always brighten up a slightly underexposed image in post, but you cannot recover highlights which have been lost because the image is overexposed. And the last thing I do when using auto mode is you want to make sure to log your exposure when doing a move. So as you fly the drone around in auto mode, it will be automatically adjusting the shutter speed and ISO to get the correct exposure. But what you don't want is when you start recording to see these massive shifts in exposure as you fly the drone around. So before you hit record, you actually want to log the exposure. And I do that by assigning my C2 button on the back of the controller to do that, so that I don't need to tap and hold the screen every time, I just tap a button. So to do this, go to settings, then go to control, scroll all the way down to button customization, and then under the C2 button, if you tap the option, you can go to camera and you can turn on AE lock on off. Now this means whenever I tap that C2 button, you will see AE lock on, which means it will not adjust the exposure. So you will know you'll not get them exposure shifts as you're recording. And then when you're done recording and you want to allow the drone to adjust them settings again, you can simply tap the C2 button and you'll see AE lock off, and the drone will automatically be able to adjust them settings. Now before we take a look at the next setting, I wanted to mention one of the things that will make your videos much more professional and more cinematic, and that is music and sound effects. Just take a look at this before and after. Way more immersive and cinematic, right? But how do you find awesome music and incredible sound effects for your videos? Well, I use and recommend Epidemic Sound. They have a huge library of 35,000 tracks and more than 90,000 sound effects, and the music is produced by professional musicians. They also own 100% of the rights to all their music, so you never need to worry about copyright penalties if you post your videos online to social media. Let's take a look at their fantastic library and how I used it for this clip. To find a sound effect, I used the Epidemic Sound themes. Themes are carefully created groups of tracks and playlists that are sorted by use case. There are currently 27 themes and 160 playlists in a huge range of music styles and sound effect types. The best part is all the playlists are continually updated to stay fresh and relevant. So for this clip, I went into the Waves theme, and I used the Ocean Wave sound effect by simply downloading it and then dragging it onto my timeline. For the music, Epidemic Sound has another great feature that recommends music based on your YouTube channel or other songs you've downloaded, and I just selected one of these. But you can search based on genre, mood, and themes. It's really that simple to get professional results. Now here is the best bit. This year I've teamed up with Epidemic Sound to bring you an exclusive Cyber Week discount on their music service. You can get a 30-day trial and an extra 2 months with 75% off by clicking my link down below in the description. This discount is valid for the personal plan, and the offer will only be available for 5 days from today. So make sure not to miss out on this offer and avail of the awesome music library Epidemic Sound has to offer by clicking my link in the description down below. Now, if I do want motion blur, if I'm flying low to the ground and I want to get that buttery smooth motion blur, then I will use manual mode. Now for motion blur, you want to use the 180-degree shutter rule. And basically what that means is you want to set your shutter speed to be twice your frame rate. So I'm using 30 FPS, so I set my shutter speed to be 1/60. If you're flying during the daytime, you also want your ISO to be as low as possible so that you don't get a noisy and soft image. It's the higher of an ISO value you use with the Mini 3 Pro, the more chance you will introduce noise, and also at them higher ISOs, the Mini 3 Pro image also gets slightly softer. So I always just keep my ISO at 100 if flying at daytime. Now, if you are outside flying at daytime and you use values like this, you will notice your screen goes completely white. That's because the image is overexposed. So to get around this and to be able to keep our shutter speed low for motion blur, I need to put on a ND filter. So I normally use an ND filter when I'm flying in the daytime. And if I put an ND filter on now, you can see that the image is now properly exposed using them values. Now, a couple of really useful new modes added to the DJI Mini 3 Pro with a recent firmware update is ISO and shutter priority. Now, these modes sit somewhere between full auto and manual mode, and they allow the drone to automatically adjust one of them values while the other stays locked in. So let's say you want to keep your shutter speed 1/60 to get that motion blur, but you're flying into and out of dark or light areas, or it's clouding over and then the sun's coming out and then it's clouding over again, so the light's constantly changing, and you want the drone to be able to automatically adjust to that. Well, you can have it automatically control ISO, but keep shutter speed locked using shutter speed priority, for example. And you can do that by going to your manual settings and then tapping auto next to ISO and making sure auto is off next to shutter. And what this means is your shutter speed will stay locked while the drone will automatically adjust your ISO. I occasionally use this if I'm flying in areas such as forests where the light changes can be very dramatic. Now, a couple of options I think you should have turned on when using the DJI Mini 3 Pro to make sure you get a properly exposed, properly framed and sharp image are overexposure warning, histogram, peaking level and grid lines. So let's turn all them features on and then I will explain how you should use them to get the best videos possible. So go to settings, then go to camera, and then the first option you will scroll down and see is histogram, so make sure that's turned on. Peaking level, you want to set to normal or high. Overexposure warning, you want to turn on. And then grid lines, you can turn on either of these options. For me personally, I just have the first one turned on. So now if I go back to the interface, let me quickly explain what all these options we've just turned on do. So the first is histogram. And the histogram is this little box over here to the left that looks like it has a graph in it. Whenever your image is properly exposed, the graph should be in the center of this box. If you have a severely underexposed image, which I'll do now to demonstrate, you will see the graph crashes all the way over to the left. And this means you have underexposed your image. If you have a overexposed image, which I'll do now, you can see the image crashes all the way over to the right, or the graph crashes all the way over to the right. So to make sure that you have a properly exposed image, you want to adjust your settings until that graph is majorly in the center of that box, and then you'll know you've exposed your image properly. Overexposure warning, which is another setting we turned on, is also super useful for knowing if you've overexposed your image, most notably the sky. Whenever you're recording, sometimes you might not notice that your sky is all white, it's overexposed, and then when you come back and look at the clip on the computer, you'll realize there's no detail in it, there's no clouds, and because you've overexposed it, you can't actually recover that information back. So a really good visual warning that you've done that is this overexposure warning. And what it does is it overlays zebras on an area of overexposure, such as the sky, so that you know that that area is overexposed, and to bring down your exposure until they disappear, and then you'll know that the detail is being recorded in that area. Now, if you're using manual focus, which you can do by tapping the AF icon on the right side of the screen, and then slide this slider up or down to focus the image, you can find that it's hard to see on the screen if anything's a little bit too soft or if everything is in focus. Well, this is where the peaking level option that we turned on comes into play. What this does is it adds a red outline around everything that's sharp and in focus. So this then makes it really easy to see on the screen as you adjust this value, what's in focus and what's not. The last option we turned on are grid lines. The grid lines are great for composing your scene. I like using this one, which is the big X, because it allows me to make sure my subject is in the center of the frame at all times. So if I'm doing an orbit, for example, sometimes it can be quite hard to keep your subject centered in the frame. It can be easy to let the subject drift to the left or right. But whenever I use this grid line, I have a big X and I can just make sure my subject is in the center at all times. Now, one final quick tip when it comes to video mode, if you change from standard video mode to master shots or quick shots, something you'll see is that the resolution doesn't get carried across. So if you've got it set to 4K in video mode, but you've never set it to 4K in quick shots will automatically default to 1080p. So make sure that you adjust your resolution again whenever you go into them automated modes. Now, quickly looking at the photo interface, on the bottom right of the screen under format, I use JPEG and RAW. RAW photos just give you way more flexibility whenever you're editing them in post. And so I always take my photos in RAW. And then if I hit the settings icon and go to camera, I use the 4:3 aspect ratio. Okay, now we've covered the major camera and photo settings. Let's now go through each DJI Fly App menu to explain what options I use to get the best results. So tapping the three dots in the top right to go to the settings menu, and you will be taken into the safety menu. And the first option you will see is the obstacle avoidance action. So the two options I primarily use when recording is bypass and off. I use brake whenever I'm getting the drone into position, but before I hit record, I always make sure I'm in bypass or off mode. The reason I do this is because let's say I'm pushing forward through a forest towards a waterfall. If the drone sees an obstacle and it's in brake mode, it will just immediately stop the drone. And this doesn't result in a very cinematic video. So I will either use bypass mode, which means when the drone sees that obstacle, it will fly around it and continue flying forward, meaning you still have a clip you can use. Or if I know I'm going to be getting close to obstacles, I'll just turn it off. But very importantly, if you are doing that, make sure you have good line of sight in the drone. Make sure the path of the drone is completely clear and you know it's not going to come into contact with any obstacles. If you have any doubts, then use bypass mode. For display radar map, I have that turned on. For max altitude, I have it set to 120 meters. That's the max altitude you can fly a drone to in the UK. And for max distance, I have it set to no limit. I just control how far I fly the drone away myself. Auto return to home altitude, I'll change this depending on where I'm at. I normally have it around 100 meters, but just make sure you have it set to a height which is higher than any of the obstacles around you, so that if return to home kicks in, the drone will fly up over them obstacles and return to you. Scrolling down to advanced safety settings, I have the signal lost setting set to return to home. This means that if I lose signal, the drone will fly back to me. And for emergency propeller stop, I have it set to emergency only because I don't want to be able to stop the propellers in the air at any time by accident. Going across to the control menu now, I have my unit set to metric, but this will be personal preference. And I have subject scanning turned off. Whenever you turn this on, it will put a small plus icon over anything that the drone thinks it can track. And then when you tap this icon, it will automatically put the box around that subject so you can start tracking them. I find that I just like to draw the box around what I'm tracking manually, and so I have this set to off. And now we have one of the new menus which was added with a recent firmware update. I've had a lot of comments on my older videos saying, where has the advanced gimbal settings menu gone? Well, this is now the gain and expo tuning settings menu. They're basically taking the expo settings menu and the advanced gimbal settings menu and combined them into one, which is now the gain and expo tuning settings menu. And this is where you can control how the drone and the gimbal reacts to inputs on the controller and scroll wheel. You can either have a really responsive drone, or if you find you're quite twitchy on the joysticks, you can have a less responsive drone to kind of smooth out that twitchiness on the controller. Let's now take a look at the settings I use. And this will give you a slightly less responsive drone, but give you much smoother motion. Let's start with my normal mode settings. Normal mode is the mode that I use most when recording video. If you're flying quite high, I find cine mode is sometimes too slow to convey motion, and sport mode is just too fast. So I find normal mode is a great sweet spot, and it allows me to get smooth motion, but also go at a fast enough speed that whenever you're up high, it conveys motion. So first we have the max angular velocity, and this is how quickly you can rotate the drone or yaw the drone. So I've actually reduced this down slightly to 60, just so that in normal mode, it doesn't rotate as fast. Now, yaw smoothness, I find the smoothness settings to be fantastic on this drone. What this does is, instead of the drone coming to a dead stop when you let go of the joystick, if you increase that smoothness value, it will actually smooth out that motion so that when you let go of the joystick, it will come to a slower stop. Now, this does add some inertia to the drone, so when you let go of the stick, it will take a few seconds to come to a complete stop, so just be aware of that. But it will also give you a much smoother slowdown as the drone comes to a stop and give you more cinematic videos. So I've increased yaw smoothness to 20. Then we have the expo settings. The expo settings allow you to change how responsive the drone is to the joystick movement as you move it further and further away from the center point. So I've decreased the pitch and roll down to 0.2 just so it's slightly less responsive or slower around the center of the joystick movement. This helps me be smoother when doing things like orbits. I've also decreased the yaw down to 0.15 again, so it's slightly less responsive towards the center of the joystick movement. And I've increased it up and down to 0.5 just to get more of a linear response, just so it's slightly more responsive when moving the drone up and down. Looking now at the max control speed for the gimbal, I have this set to 15. I believe this is the default value, and this is just how quickly the gimbal can rotate up and down. And tilt smoothness, again, this is this slow down motion that the drone does. So if you have a low tilt smoothness value, when you let go of the scroll wheel, the gimbal will come to a dead stop. And the more you increase this value, the more that when you let off the scroll wheel, the drone will actually buffer out that movement and slowly bring the gimbal to a stop to give you more cinematic motion. So I've actually increased this up to 20, just when I come off that scroll wheel, that the gimbal will actually smooth out that motion for me. Looking now at my cine mode settings. Now, cine mode is the mode I use whenever I'm flying low to the ground, or I'm flying in a tight confined area, or I'm flying close to a subject. And this is when I want the slowest, most cinematic motion possible. So for max angular velocity, I've decreased this down to 15, just so the drone yaws or rotates slower. And again, I've increased that yaw smoothness to 25, so when I let go of the joystick, that movement will be buffered out. For max control speed, I have this set at 10, just so that the gimbal moves really slowly, because I find if you're really close to something, you don't want quick gimbal movements, you want it to be quite slow. And I've increased that tilt smoothness all the way up to 25, again so that when I let go of that scroll wheel, it buffers out that movement for me to bring the gimbal to a nice slow stop that looks really cinematic. And lastly, we have my sport mode settings. Now, I only really use sport mode to record video if I'm flying super high and I want to get a lot of motion in my clips, or I just want a really fast sense of speed to my clips, then I'll use sport mode. Apart from that, I primarily use sport mode just to get the drone into position quickly, to get it lined up with my point of interest, to get it ready to record, and then I'll flip it into cine or normal mode. Top tip, just remember obstacle avoidance, regardless of what you have it set to, turns off, completely off when flying in sport mode, so just be careful. So for max angular velocity, again the rotation or yaw speed, I've increased this to 150, just to give me more maneuverability in the air, more speed to get into position quickly. And I have yaw smoothness increased to 20, again just to buffer out that motion for them times I do use it to record video. I've just left the expo settings at their default values, so pitch and roll 0.4, yaw 0.3, and up and down 0.4. And then for max control speed on the gimbal, I've increased this to 50, again just so I can move that gimbal up and down quicker to get my point of interest or subject framed as fast as possible, and to use this little battery when trying to get ready to record video. And lastly, I have tilt and smoothness increased to 20, again just to buffer out that gimbal motion if I do decide to use it to record video. Now those are my settings. If you want to reset them at any time, you can just tap the reset current settings button, hit reset, and they'll go back to their default values. Now coming out of Gain and Expo, you will see gimbal mode. I have this set to follow mode, so this keeps the horizon level at all times. FPV mode is where the horizon will bank left or right as you rotate the drone left or right to give you this more FPV feel. But I find follow mode where the horizon stays level gives the best looking videos with this drone. Scrolling down, you will see stick mode, and in here you can actually change the movements the drone makes to inputs on the joysticks. So for example, I'm on mode 2, so when I press the left stick up, you will see the drone will ascend. But if I change this to stick mode 3, you can see that when I push the left stick up, the drone will actually fly forward. So I use mode 2, but this will be completely personal preference. Scrolling down to button customization, the only two I have adjusted in here are the C1 and C2 buttons, which are the buttons on the back of the DJI RC controller. So we've already talked about what I've changed my C2 button to, which is the AE lock on and off, so I can control the lock exposure functionality with the C2 button. For C1, I have it set to recenter or tilt down gimbal. If I have the gimbal at any angle and I want to recenter it really quickly, I can just tap that button. And then if I want to go to a top-down shot super quickly, I can just tap that button again. So this again just saves time whenever trying to get your point of interest or subject framed properly. The rest of these values, I just have at their default. So right dial, I have set to zoom in and out, so I can zoom in and out using the right scroll wheel. C1 and right dial, which is where you hold the C1 button and use that right dial, I have set to adjust shutter speed. So you can actually adjust the shutter speed using the controller and not the screen. And the C2 button and the right dial, I have set to adjust ISO. Going across to camera. So for format, I use MP4. As we've explained, for color, I use normal. And for coding format, I use H.264. Now the reason I do this is H.265 is a newer codec and it results in smaller file sizes, but it's also more processor intensive to play back. So what you might find if you use H.265 is that whenever you view the clips on your computer, they might stutter, they might be jerky, and this might just be because your computer doesn't have a high enough specification to play back these videos. I find H.264 to be much more universal, and you're much less likely to have any issues when playing it back on any computer, and so I just stick with H.264. For video subtitles, I have these turned off. If you have this turned on, it will overlay a subtitle track over your video, which will display things like the settings you were using for the video, your drone's position, etc. But I never really use this, and so I just have it turned off. For anti-flicker, I have this set to auto. I think the drone does a great job when it's an auto. As mentioned, you want histogram turned on, your peaking level set to normal or high, your overexposure warning turned on, and your grid line set to your personal preference, although I prefer the big X, which is the first option. For white balance, I have this just set to auto. Again, I find the drone does a great job. And then we have a new option, which again was added in one of the latest firmware updates, the style parameters. Now we have two if you open the menu out by clicking this little chevron on the left. We have sharpness, where you can increase or decrease the sharpness which is applied to the video from the drone, and also the noise reduction, we can increase this or decrease this. For me, I personally find the image looks best when these are set to 00, so that's what I have them set to. So there you have it, the settings I use when recording videos and taking photos with the DJI Mini 3 Pro, along with some of the DJI Fly App settings I use to try and get the best results with this drone. And hopefully these settings will mean you get better looking videos and more awesome photos with your DJI Mini 3 Pro. Now if you like this video and you've learned something new, please let me know by giving me a thumbs up and clicking that like button down below. And if you love all things drones and want to know how to get more cinematic videos and better photos with your drone, then I recommend you check out my channel where I have a ton of other content to help you level up your drone game. Make sure to subscribe and make sure that notification bell's on so you don't miss any of my upcoming videos. And if you want to stick around and watch a few more of them now, here's a few I personally recommend. I'll not keep you back any further. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you over there.